Hello, everyone. We are going to start in the next 1 minute. But of course, I'm super excited to talk a little bit about what today's discussion is. Of course, I'm sure everybody's gone through the topic briefly. It's called Reimagining Luxury, and it gives me great pleasure to invite you all for a chat with Mr. Darshan Mehta. Of course, we are going to begin in a minute, but I wanted to take some time to tell you all how special today's discussion is going to be, because it's not going to be any ordinary panel or any ordinary chat. It's going to be quite interactive, where I'm going to encourage the audience, that is you guys, to keep communicating, to keep talking, to keep questioning us, so that I can keep coming back to you, taking questions from you, and asking Mr. Mehta. So it would be great if you guys all could be extremely interactive and ask all your questions, of course, based on the topic that we are discussing today. So I'm going to request my panelist now, Mr. Darshan Mehta, to switch on his video and audio, so that we can just do a quick check. And Mr. Jain as well. Sir, if you could just switch on your audio and your video, we can begin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being fresh this morning for us, for this wonderful chat. Hello, sir.
Morning, Nitish.
Hi, Darshan. Thank you.
What a strange medium to say hello, no?
You're looking very dapper, Darshan. Very envious of you and of your background.
Trying to reimagine luxury. Starting with reimagining ourselves.
So I'm sure both of you can continue talking all day, but I'd like to now introduce the talk to our audience. So first of all, a very warm welcome to my wonderful audience. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful chat with Mr. Darshan Mehta on reimagining luxury. Of course, I would like to tell you a little bit about today's chat. So today's chat is focused on the future of luxury, the luxury market in India, e-commerce, and what's to come, in the near future. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you all to Mr. Nitish Jain, our president, the president of SP Jain School of Global Management, a passionate educationist and a philanthropist and an avid reader. Sir, I would like you to say a few words on Mr. Mehta, of course, because you both go a long way. So if you could just talk a little bit about Darshan in your own words and, pass on the message to the audience, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Smita. Darshan, great to see you, and thanks for coming today. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to today's very exciting, I won't want to say interview, but just a conversation with Darshan Mehta. So it is with great pleasure and pride I introduce to you my good friend and college mate, Darshan Mehta. He is currently the CEO of India's #1 company in the luxury retailing sector, Reliance Brands. But also allow me to please share with you his most impressive background. Darshan is a chartered accountant and a cost and works accountant by qualification. His career of 35 years encompasses a senior leadership role at Trikaya Gray and Trikaya Gray Advertising, sorry for that, a long stint in heading Arvind Brands, where he ended up being the president and CEO. And finally, in 2007, reinventing it all with Reliance Brands, which was then just a startup with a handful of employees in a small artsy office. Under his astute leadership, it has grown to over 750 corporate and 5,000 store employees across 60 cities in India. Today, Reliance Brands is the largest player in the luxury to premium sector, with an enviable portfolio of 56 international brands operating in 438 mono-brand stores and 346 shop-in-shops in India. He is also repeatedly spotted on professional index lists like the BOF 500, Black Book Luxury Top 100, a nod to his contribution in building the luxury and retail landscape in India. Apart from his professional life, he's an avid trekker and finds time, that is when he's not in Milan, Paris, or London, he finds time to at least once a year explore the Himalayas. Those in the know mention Darshan's love for contemporary art, especially Asian arts, along with spatial art installations. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the hugely successful but very humble and understated Darshan Mehta in conversation with S.P. Jain's director of the Master of Luxury Management program, Smita Jain. Thank you, Smita, and over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you for introducing the panel, the chat. We're going to begin our discussion now, Darshan. So before we begin, is there anything you would like to tell the audience in terms of how interactive they can be with you? I mean, feel free to give some introductory notes if you wish.
Well, after Nitish's very impressive commentary, it's difficult to comment back there. All I can say is we had this phrase in advertising which says, neighbors envy, owners pride. If you recall, that was a Onida line of advertising. Okay, and my recollection of my good friend Nitish from college days was that he was every boy's envy in the class. He was the most dapper man in the class. So Nitish, that's how fond the recollection. But coming back to today, as Nitish mentioned, I started my early years in advertising, and it was also the time when I had kind of started building on earlier personal family. So I realized that advertising was a subject everyone had a point of view. Oh, your new ad, couldn't you have made the logo a bit bigger? Couldn't you have done that, etc., etc. The moot point I learned early on is that whether it is then advertising or it's now fashion or it's luxury, sometimes fresh points of view are sharper and brighter than stale points of view. Okay? So to that extent, conversations like this I look forward to, as I even mentioned in my brief video, is that I generally end up with selfish reasons and motives, learning more and walking away with more insights, as I often do from my own store teams. So I look forward to this conversation as much as I guess Smita you do, and I guess rest of the participants do. And I know it's a Saturday morning, so let's better make it worthwhile for all of us.
Absolutely.
So, happy to chat.
Great. So, I mean, as I already mentioned to the audience, you can keep putting your questions on the chat so that I can keep going back and forth, and I can pick your questions and I can ask them to Mr. Darshan Mehta. So that'd be great if you can be as interactive as you can. All right, so I'm going to start obviously with, I think, something which everybody wants to know, and I think it's a mystery. I mean, everybody talks about the Indian luxury consumer, but at the end of the day, it is a mystery. When you talk about luxury in India and when you talk about Indian luxury consumers, how does an Indian customer understand luxury? If you had to put it in a few words. Sure.
Yeah, it's a good way to start. Typically, from an academic point of view, you start at a 40,000 feet level. But just before that, Smita, I'm happy if you just want to call me Darshan, just keep the conversation easy and flowing. And for the rest of the participants too. I have in this downtime, I guess a lot of us are catching about other things we want to do. So currently I'm into reading a few books from Mr. Shashi Tharoor, one of the finest writers India has produced. And one of the things he said is that the singular truth about India is you can only talk about it in the plural and never in the singular. So there is nothing like a luxury consumer in India. You know, India is first of all, as they say, a country of countries. And there are many different generations, in a sense, coexisting simultaneously. And as they say now, the 50s is the new 20s, and so you have the Gen Z, and you have the millennials, and you have the. So it's a multi-generational context, and typically, just because, as in an academic point of view, we like to create cohorts and boxes. Okay, I'm going to, and I know there are a lot of students in the audience there, so just to help them. Put some structured thoughts. We tend to think of luxury consumers in India in 3 or 4 what we call cohorts.
Yeah.
There is a traditionally what we call the old money cohort. People who are 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation riches, who've been born into rich families, who had parents, grandparents, okay, who were global citizens, widely traveled, etc., etc. Cut to the fact that that is the smallest and honestly the least relevant cohort. Okay. So it's very, very, very tiny number and in percentage terms. And more importantly, they rarely, if ever, okay, are shopping in India. As I said, they're nomadic, they're constantly in and out. All of
traveling,
The most important, the next 2 or 3 cohorts is, much as I don't like the word, the new money customer. The India story is of first generation riches that were made in the last decade or 2 decades. As per the last report that I came across, 2019, India had the 5th largest number of billionaires in the world, 169 billionaires. Okay, and barring 5 of them, okay, the 164 billionaires, okay, that wealth was made in the last 2 decades. India has close to $800,000 millionaires. That means there are people who in dollar terms have more than investable or disposable or liquid surplus of more than $1 million. That's how millionaires are defined. And that bucket's growing rapidly, etc. And I'll talk a bit about, when we start conversing about the traits of new money. But then there is what I call the new money, the self-made, the entrepreneurs, all of that. There is another subclass of that.
Professionals.
What we call gold collar professionals.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so people like me, we are professionals. We have disposable surpluses. Okay, but there is a gold collar around our neck. So most of us are married to our work. Time is a new currency rather than money being the new currency, and there are slightly different traits to that, etc., etc. And the last, which is more the aspirants, okay, we tend to, because we like acronyms and everyone loves acronyms, okay. The acronym is called Henry, okay, but they are high earners, but not rich yet. So they haven't made their pot of wealth, but they are beginning to come into, high income earning brackets. So typically the double income families, more than 40, 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs earning, they haven't made their pot of gold or pot of wealth as yet, etc. But they will get there, and they are parallel getting into. So a big eye on that. Now, that's the last. The last bucket is the largest in terms of size, because that's the story of India which sets us apart from the Western markets. That we are far from saturated. People tend to come here because the headroom for growth is huge, and that's a bucket more and more people are coming into. Likewise, the gold collar professionals, which the Henrys will become, and then of course the first generation new money, okay, and all of this put together creates a bit of the Indian story. There is another way of looking at it from psychographic reasons. India and China send the largest number of students to US every year, between 100 and 120,000. I am told, and maybe you have a better number, but close to 200,000 students go out of India for either bachelor's or master's or post-graduation studies internationally. Okay, 90% plus of them come back. So every year you have 150 to 200,000 kids with anywhere from 2 years to 4 or 5 years of an international living experience. So they're exposed to new brands, new lifestyles, Western ways of living. And it's not just US, of course, large body. You've got Canada, you've got Europe, you've got Australia, all of that, etc. And they carry back the influences with them, okay, of new consumers. So that's another way of looking. So we can keep on going on analyzing, and each of these cohorts or buckets, so to say, there are different insights of how to handle. But one last point, because I don't want to hog the conversation. But I would urge people to think of every single consumer as a cohort of one. Okay, so we all live in an environment where you are possibly changing your display picture either on Instagram or on WhatsApp, a few times a week and so on and so forth. So you're building. Smita Jain has a persona of her own, and every young consumer here has a persona, and we all know your persona from Tinder to Instagram to Facebook to LinkedIn, okay, could all be very different personas. So that's the other thing that's coming apart, okay, that very often the person and the persona for young people are at variance. Okay, but when you go in as a consumer, current or aspirant luxury consumer, when Smita Jain walks into one of my stores, whether you walk into a Bottega store or a Jimmy Choo store or a Michael Kors store, okay, you want to be treated as not part of a cohort. You want to be treated as a bucket of one, okay? And the ideal thing is, welcome back, Ms. Jain, we're not seeing you in a while, and say, wow, the guy knows me, okay? And so on and so forth, etc. And that's where luxury starts from. But that's the story of luxury consumers. So we have many generations.
Completely relate. Yeah, completely. I mean, very well put together. And yeah, of course, personalization is very important, as you said, like, that name calling and, like making you feel special. I think that goes along with luxury. I mean, that's extremely important. So since you mentioned a little bit about China, I also wanted to kind of ask you, your opinion when you compare, or if you look at the Indian market and the Chinese luxury market. I mean, people have their own, versions of where India is at and where China is at. What is your opinion? Like, do you think that the Indian market will come close to the Chinese market in size, in their spending habits, their spending power? How do you compare these two markets?
It's a question I've been asked quite often, fairly innumerable number of times in different forums across the last more than a decade. And I say this ever so often. India will never be the next China. India will be the next India. Okay. Every society and every culture, okay, has unique nuances. 40, 50 years of a communist regime, which impacts it's not just an economic model or a political model. It's a social and a cultural model. So for 50 long years, okay, anything that called culture, okay, that China inherited through centuries earlier, just vanished. I remember a friend, in fact, he's now a neighbor here where I'm staying. And in his earlier years, he said, Darshan, in 98, 99, as a young kind of rookie, I got posted in China. And that was around the time, 99, 2000, when the first metro cash and carry, the big box retailers from the Western world started coming to China. He says, I saw the before and the after. Before, everything in China was gray. Everyone wore a uniform, clothes were gray, buildings were painted a certain color. So he says there was no concept of color, there was no concept of differentiation. And suddenly in 2 or 3 years, okay, color came into their lives. They could choose the color of the lipstick or the makeup or the clothes that they are wearing, or, so on and so forth, etc. And to that extent, China over the last 20 years has taken on to luxury literally with a vengeance. Okay. India hasn't gone through that process. Our culture never vanished, notwithstanding the 3 centuries of the Mughal rule or the nearly 190 years of the British rule. Our culture carried forward. So culturally, we will never ever be the level of, if I may bluntly put it, show off. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll never be that. I mean, I've seen going into Shanghai, even going to Hong Kong, but much more places like Shanghai, Beijing, you could have whole families in a loud Balenciaga identical sneakers or a Gucci something plastered. Very, very rarely that you'll find such a nuance in India. India will interpret. So a lot of our cultures, our traditions, our crafts, our textiles, all that heritage, the beautiful patolas and all the weaves on textiles and all that heritage came into clothing continued. There wasn't a 50-year disruption. So India will be the next India. Okay. Also, most people talk of the hockey stick curve, the inflection. I think the Indian growth story is more like a tide. So my office, is in Cup Parade, and I'm like I'm as I joke that I'm at the end of Bombay where you fall off into the sea, because the very tip of the city. And ever so often in the evening, I see dry, barren land. And after 2 hours of work, etc., I look around in the window and it's all full of water. You don't see the tide coming, but if you take a snapshot, suddenly you'll see the tide is in. So it's not going to be one big wave or a hockey stick curve, but it's going to be clearly we see the tide rising. I've been in this business for the last 2 decades in fashion, and I've seen 10 years back, okay, I don't think a 45 to 55-year-old man would think about the sock that he's wearing. At best, it's the shirt and the trouser and maybe the belt. Today, that same person is thinking about saying, if this is the color of the shirt or the type of the shirt I'm wearing, what should be the socks? It generally doesn't show unless you're sitting on your trouser belt. So there are lots of nuances, but clearly the tide moves into India, and India will be the next India. So we are it's like US and Mexico comparing themselves. China is also, they are 5x, 6x our size in terms of the sheer size of the retail business. We are $900 billion, they are $5 trillion. So they're already 6x us. Okay. So culturally, size-wise, it's a very, very unique and different market.
So, I'm getting a few interesting thoughts and quotes
Please, of
from
course.
you. So I'm just going to pick up this one statement, which I think is quite interesting. And I don't know if you have something to say about that, but how can we market our Made in India tag? Every country prides itself in terms of manufacturing their goods locally. Example, made in Geneva. Why can't we have made in Mumbai, etc.? This is coming from Shivansh Lodha. This is a question. What's your take on that, Darshan? Like, why do you think, and it's true, even I have this question, like, why is it so difficult for, a Made in India brand to be globally, luxurious? Why is that?
So it's again a good question I come across this so often. So, India post our independence, we started building the foundation of our economy from scratch. We're quite a poor nation when we were born as an independent nation in 1947. And the foundation started with manufacturing. So everything had to be made, physically made. Okay. And a lot of us are still seeped into that concept of made in India means manufactured in India. If you look at what happened in the Western world, as those economies, okay, post World War II, when they were also decimated, the Japan's and US and all of Europe, which was engulfed in the World War II, they were rebuilding. But after the first 20 years, they quickly came out of it, and they realized that the money lies in the intellectual property and not in the physicality of the product. Let me give a simple example.
Yeah.
A Ralph Lauren polo that you buy, that polo's factory cost, actual manufacturing cost, which is 98% made in China, that Ralph Lauren polo cost no more than $14 to $15.
Wow.
You will, at a full price, buy that anywhere from $90 to $100 at a full price in Macy's. And then it starts getting discounted and so on and so forth. Even at a discounted price, you will buy it 4 to 5x, okay, or 4x your actual factory price. Okay. So what did the Western world started cleverly doing? Okay, is they started just owning on the intellectual property and building the halo. Now the IP also includes the designs.
Yeah.
The silhouettes, the materials, the yarns, the kind of colors that you use, so on and so forth. But the physical aspect, what we call the cheap needle, because 90% of fabrics or garments are done by human hand, and women hand, okay, because God's possibly given in women's fingers the thing that, so men just don't have it. So there is a disaggregation of what we call ownership. Okay, now let me cut to another example. And I'll come back because it's an important question. If you take a Land Rover or a Range Rover, one of the finest cars, okay, it's in the top luxury cars in the world. Is it English, is it Indian, or is it Chinese? So we all know that it's owned by an Indian company, which we are very proud. A lot of it is still made in England, and 1 out of 3 cars or Land Rover or Range Rover sells in China. So 33% of the market is China. A large manufacturing base, not 100%, but large manufacturing base is still in England, okay, or in Great Britain, and ownership in India.
India.
So this concept of ownership itself must go through a mental change. Everything is not vertical in nature. That means the guy who owns a brand and who designs it also owns a factory and manufacturing. Even Zara doesn't own the factory, okay, in which it's made. The richest man in one of the richest man in Europe is Mr. Arnault and the gentleman who owns, okay, the Inditex group, which makes Zara. The richest man in Japan is Yanai-san, who is a gentleman who owns Uniqlo. And I can go on with examples like that. These people don't manufacture in their countries.
Yeah.
So think of, as young students and upcoming professionals, think of intellectual property, because the power lies in the IP.
Mm.
Apple's power, the world's most expensive company, a $2 trillion company, okay, does not manufacture, okay, in US. It's manufactured in China, Foxconn, now in India, etc., etc. But they own the Apple brand, they own the design, and they own the IP. Okay, now I'll still just answer this question to say, will the next Giorgio Armani come out of India? That's another way out. Although Giorgio Armani, okay, doesn't make it in his own factories. It used to be 100% made in Italy. Now a lot of it is made in Portugal and other parts of the world also. Okay, I firmly believe that as the center of gravity for luxury consumption moves into Asia, last year more than 50% consumption came from Asia, Japan, China, now India, for catching up, etc. And the Asian consumer, people like you and me, or much more the people in this audience, the younger people, as they become confident of who they are in life, okay, their own palettes and tastes in fashion will not be only mirroring and copying Western. They will start assimilating, okay. So they will start assimilating maybe a kaftanish look or a sarong look or a sari look with a Western, outfit and so on and so forth. They'll create their own sensibilities. Okay, and as a result, I do believe that the next inspiration, the next Giorgio Armani, will surely come from India. Okay, also China. Okay, in fact, Japan's already created a very powerful fashion sensibility of its own. Okay, which is very Japanese, and it's happening in China. It will happen in India. That I have no doubt. But will it be manufactured in India? It should be manufactured with what we call the cheapest needle is. Okay, and in the manufacturing, the margins are very little. I don't know if that answers the question.
But as you said, it does answer. But I still have, one small question with the response that you gave. As you said, yeah, it's possible that the next Giorgio Armani will come maybe from India or China. Will it be accepted globally? What are your
for sure. For sure. Okay. I was leafing through some of the Instagram posts. Okay. In the last two presentations. Or the appearances that Kamala Harris, the Democrat Vice President in the running, Vice Presidential candidate, okay, she wore a Prabal Gurang. He is from Nepal. He's right here. Why India? It could be talent will have a global forum. I have absolutely no. Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, for instance, is as much followed in New York, okay, as other parts of the world. Okay, his sensibilities on jewelry. So I mean, one Raghvendra Rathod's Bandgala sits very powerfully next to Xenia. Okay, so to that extent, I have absolutely no.
Some of these even young brands like Shivana Naresh or SS Home and Sarang Sandeep, they're doing pretty good stuff. I think the only thing is storytelling. Maybe it's not happening in the right way, or the communication, the way it should happen. Maybe that's not still
globally luxury consumers are becoming a global village. They are not chasing a nationality. When I think when Kamala Harris wears a Prabal Gurang, okay, or the earlier white lady, when she used to don lots of say, let's say she's wearing a Ralph and Russo or something, an English designer or an Asian designer, I don't think they are making a statement of nationality. They are making a statement of who they are. See, you must understand, luxury in the fashion context. Every day you are playing a role. So today you decided to get up and in your mind be this person, okay, and maybe in the evening you are a different person. As I said, every person has multiple personas today, correct?
Yeah.
And to that extent, your choice of the brand is a powerful lever in who in your headspace you want to be today.
Hmm.
Okay. And in that choice of the designer, it is increasingly becoming agnostic to nationality.
Hmm.
In fact, long back, Japanese designers are like head and shoulders, and that's not just in fashion. If you look at art, and if you look at we spoke about contemporary art. If you look at architecture, some of the finest design architects are coming out of Japan for quite a while. Okay, so
Absolutely.
to that extent, along with the creation of wealth that is happening in Asia, Asian sensibilities, okay, whether it's in food, whether it's in clothing, whether it's in art, architecture, all of that is coming up and increasingly getting accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. You spoke so much about, global consumer, and that kind of makes me want to say almost digital consumer, like today, luxury is being consumed on social media, on all digital platforms. I mean, it's been amplified so much in the digital, platforms, and people are loving it. People are loving it when a luxury brand comes and, does a sneak peek or does a little bit of storytelling or talks a little bit about their product and things like that. But that brings me to the next segment of our discussion, which is basically when you talk about the omni-channel approach, or when you talk about luxury sales, or when you talk about the consumers, how do I say, like first impression on a luxury product. I want to ask you a little bit about the traditional mode of selling, that is brick and mortar. Because of this entire amplification of digital, consuming luxury in the e-commerce space, where do you think where do you see brick and mortar retail going? Is it going to be as important as it was earlier? Do you think it's going to be not so important anymore? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, favorite question asked often. I'll make 2 points here. Most people first tend to think online and offline as a bit of a binary, in the sense you're either an online buyer or you're an offline buyer. And my only way of, so to say, proving the point I'm making is saying, if you have now, and thanks to the COVID disruption, and a lot of us are hunkered down in our homes, as you're constantly consuming entertainment on the OTT platform, which is everyone's on Netflix or everyone's on Amazon Prime or whatever, etc., does it mean that when social distancing ends and we become what we are wired for as social beings, okay, and not socially distant beings, okay, will you not go to the cinema? And when you start going back to the cinema, will you stop consuming Netflix or Amazon Prime?
Yeah.
So first of all, don't think of this as a binary, number one. Second, in pure luxury, and from a slightly academic point of view, there's a defined zone of what is called first-line luxury, what is clearly what we call affordable luxury. It's a phrase that the Americans coined when the Coach was launched. And then there is, premium and mainstream. There are lots of strata. But if I talk about pure luxury, the theater that happens around the shopping experience will never ever get fully 100% replicated online. Online is still a very clinical and lonely experience. Okay. So let's take Moncler, okay, and I travel, I used to travel frequently, so buying warm, clothes, etc. One of my brands that I quite love is Moncler, true luxury brand. A visit to the Moncler store, and I can close my eyes and reimagine even today what that store on Madison Avenue, New York looks like, or what the store in London looks like. And then buying Moncler on a list or on a Farfetch or on Net-a-Porter, okay, is not the same.
Yeah.
Okay, all that on that. So, long story short, brick and mortar will never go away. In fact, that theater and that experience will become stronger and stronger. Okay, and you use the word storytelling. The storytelling there happens different way. It's conversational. Okay, there is a lot of storytelling that happens online also, because you have the audience, a certain amount of, if I can get your attention, then I have your attention online, and I can do a lot of storytelling through visual imagery and so on and so forth. But there's a drama which can't be parallel. But there is I think in a country like India, where it is finding needles in a haystack because there are pockets of rich people spread across the length and breadth of the country. See,
Mhm.
unlike, let's take a market like Russia, it's a two-city market. You find the rich people either in Moscow or St. Petersburg. There's no third city. You're not going to find them in Serbia, or you're not going to find them in, distant recesses, luxury consumer, correct? Or in China, it is basically concentrated on the eastern belt, okay? The rest of China, okay? Not true in India. In fact, we just did a 4 lakh rupee sale to a family of 3 people in Ratlam. Okay, now most people need to figure, is Ratlam in Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh? You don't know. But so there are pockets of rich people,
Yeah.
and hence digital commerce as a channel, I like that much more than e-commerce, that provides you a reach and an access. And because the infrastructure of brick and mortar retail in luxury has still not developed, and fashion luxury, unlike say automobile luxury, you can set up a BMW showroom, anywhere. The first time, I had to discover one. It was in the deep recess of Chembur somewhere. I passed it out twice and saying, "Where are you?" And saying, "No, sir, come back. I saw your car go back." I had to discover it. But you can't set up a Vuitton store, in the middle of nowhere in Chembur or Kurla, correct? So there's a need for adjacencies, and there's a whole theater and all of that needs to happen. Now, because that infrastructure does not exist beyond 3 or 4 cities in India,
Yeah.
but the demand exists, a lot of that reason, omni-channel commerce, digital commerce is going to flourish. But I still believe that the aura and the halo will still come from brick and mortar commerce.
There is this.
I can see there are a lot of questions, but
I want to pick up this couple of questions from the audience. There is a question by Vaibhavi who's asking, "Sir, I would like to know your thoughts on introducing augmented reality in luxury retail stores in India."
it's around the corner. In fact, generally I stay away in forums like this talking about my own company, but Reliance just launched at our last general meeting. Our chairman just introduced what is called Geo Glasses. So it's a better form factor, okay, of the Metalius, or currently you have the you play the augmented reality games. It's quite bulky, okay. So imagine a form factor which is like this, okay, or what you're wearing, and Bluetooth connected to something that's your handheld, okay. And as
you can shop, you can browse.
Yeah. So everything is moving to also voice command first of all. So the touch is going away, okay. So what tends to happen in augmented reality, and already augmented reality fashion shows are now, in fact, both the fashion weeks in India, the Delhi, the Couture Fashion Week and the Lakme Fashion Week in Bombay, one in September, one in October, are both digital only shows. Okay, both are going to happen in 3-dimensional format, and both of them, if you have AR, okay, or VR, but more AR glasses, then you can participate in the shows thinking you're sitting in row 1 and get the same flavor as you're in the first row. So 3D mapping of the stores is now very, very common. We started doing it 3 years ago. Okay. And then if you have AR glasses, okay, then you could actually, at the touch of an app, you can walk into, let's say, an Emporium Mall in Delhi or a Palladium Mall, and then actually start navigating a Vuitton store or a Xenia store or a Giorgio Armani store, okay, on your glasses. So not far away. In fact, these will become very, very commonplace in less than 18 months.
That sounds quite interesting, quite exciting, interesting, and looking forward to something like this. Absolutely.
ML and AR are phrases that, so machine learning happened quite a while back. Augmented reality is just around the corner. So ML, AR are commonly used phrases now at the back end and what we are planning in luxury.
Absolutely. There is another question that I'd like to take from the audience. Mahi asks, how is digital transformation impacting the luxury high fashion sector in India? Do you foresee the Indian market adapting to luxury high fashion shopping online during and post COVID-19? So she's talking about adapting.
So first, I don't understand what the word high fashion means. I mean, luxury is meant to be. Let's take a step back as to how luxury got invented. So luxury got invented largely by the French in fashion through haute couture. Okay. Now, haute couture basically meant that there were seamstresses, okay, which were very few in number. So they were like, those seamstresses were like surgeons. We always say the skill of a surgeon is God's gift. You can't go to a medical school and acquire it, okay, because it lies in your hands, okay, the steadiness of your hand and how they are performing all of that. So a seamstress, okay, especially in the French cultural background, okay, those were patronized by the aristocracy because they had a class system, and clearly the aristocrats wanted a certain kind of, and that's why all haute couture was 100% handmade and took time. No different than Gujarati, rich housewife having to, or lady having to wait for 2 years for one family to make a patola. So you ordered your patola, and there were only particular artisans who could make that patola weave. And you took 2 years and periodically went to the household to see how your patola is getting woven, because you could already see that working. So, both were happening. But going back to where luxury got invented. And then luxury was very closed door. Okay. So it was meant to be it was very private. There was no democratization of luxury that had happened. Okay. And that created a bit of the cult or the mystery around luxury and all of that. And then as a bit of industrialization happened, like Mr. Ferragamo used to make handmade heel. He invented the heel. And only unless you are not so-and-so in Hollywood, okay, he would not even make that shoe for you, and it's all handcrafted and so on.
Yeah.
But as industrialization started happening, okay, as I said, the unbundling happening, intellectual property owned by someone and manufacturing someone else, it in a sense started changing. So I don't know today what the word luxury, high fashion. So Chanel is luxury and Hermes is luxury, and so is Vuitton luxury. Some people use the word logo luxury. Some people and saying, look, some brands are very logo driven. So Vuitton could be a logo luxury, and an Hermes scarf. Okay, rarely has Hermes or a H written on it, etc., etc. And but that's the, so to say, signature of each of the brand. So now having demystified that, her question of adaptation in India. See what tends to happen. Whether it is food or fashion, it's a concept of exposure. The more through international travel, more through a flat world, through digital, media, more through students going, coming back, all of that, etc. happening. You have 26 million Indians travel internationally every year, of which we have reasonably a good number, that 3 to 4 million are luxury travelers. And of course, people travel, this 26 million is people who are traveling for work or pleasure or both. Mostly it's both, okay? Because when you're traveling for work, you also do some shopping or whatever. Those 3-4 million luxury shoppers, okay, bring back a lot of influences, okay, and they're gradually, constantly upgrading their own knowledge. And then there's a lot of decibel noise happening around these fashion weeks, and all of that kind of raises a quotient of understanding of what luxury is. And as people's assimilation of luxury starts happening, more and more, let's say, even young, I see so many young consumers in India now very easily carrying a Gucci bag with a Zara top. Okay? So that head to toe luxury, which was a mindless adoption of luxury, is now moving into an assimilation of luxury. Which is meaning to say, in the morning you could go to Matunga Mysore Cafe for your favorite dosa, but you could be at Wasabi eating expensive sushi dinner in the evening, and it's the same customer.
Yeah, we want every.
Okay. Because it caters to the palate, and hence it's the Zara and the Gucci example. Correct. Yeah. And that's where the big evolution of luxury is happening. It is permeating. Also, initially you're wearing luxury as a badge to get entry into a club, because new money wants to announce itself.
Yeah.
So the Beamer in your Porsche or the bag that you're wearing, is a badge to get into the club. I'm already seeing at the end of 10 years, okay, a lot of the luxury consumption happening for self. So it's no longer vain and needs to chest beat and announce itself. Okay. So someone would buy easily a Bottega bag, and to the eye who knows that this is a Bottega, would know the weave or the, so on and so forth, etc. Or a Zegna suit, because men's clothing, incidentally, really rarely have logos, So they still wear a Canali suit or a Zegna or a Giorgio Armani suit, okay, for that self. But you're not wearing a big Louis Vuitton buckled belt.
Yeah.
And more places now I'm finding that actually wearing that big Vuitton logo belt or a car shoe with that Vuitton big logo is actually seen bad manners. And hence we are seeing that luxury is now really permeating deeper and deeper as people get more confident with themselves. So I hope that answers the lady's question, my point of view.
Absolutely. I'm going to take one more question before we move into the next segment, where we've got We've got Ragit asking about import duties. How do India's stringent import duties affect luxury sales? Do you think it hinders the growth of the luxury segment in India? What are your thoughts on that?
Am I allowed to ask Ragit a question?
Yeah, of course.
So Ragit, on clothing, most of luxury is clothing. No? We spoke about that. What is the import duty? This is not a trick question. It's a straightforward question.
Ragit, if you're there, then we're expecting you to give us a response quickly on the chat. Or I can maybe...
Okay, I'll go for it just to explain to everyone. The import duty is only 20% first. Now, when you buy let's say I import a Xenia suit, and typically from the price that what is called landed cost, the full MRP is normally 2.5 times. In many countries, it's 3 times. Correct? So if I import something for 100 euro or let's say 50,000 rupees, chances I'm selling it for 1,25,000. On 50,000 rupees, the import duty is 20, because import duty is on the import price, so it's only 20%. Now, when you are selling it at MRP, the GST or the VAT or the sales tax, as we understand, is only 12% in India. If you buy that same suit in London, the VAT there is 21% on the sales price. So I don't want to make this into accountancy class, but if Ragit is interested, I can prove to him that the combination of VAT or GST in India and import duty, we are actually cheaper than any European market. Because in Europe, the VAT moves from 20% to 24%. Okay. And they also have 10% import duty. I have 20% import duty. So what has happened is through constant misnomers, or constantly people mouthing something, okay, and I have a phrase, a lot of people smoke someone else's exhaust. So you heard it without bothering to check onto it. You go and say, yeah. You know, in India, everything has to be very high priced because we have very stringent import duties. 3 years back, that was the case. When the GST happened, when countervailing duty became, you know, off the table, okay, we've actually moved to a very new regime. So it's a misnomer, which is hopefully the fourth, so to say, misunderstanding I'm hoping to demystify in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You have, at least for me, absolutely you have burst that misunderstanding bubble. And I was also someone who thought that, okay, no, I think some products are more expensive here because of the import duties or the taxes or whatever. But I think now that
alcohol, I was only talking about clothing. Sorry to interrupt you. There are categories, cars, alcohol. There are 100% duties. Okay. That's why people, you know, the 2 bottles that you allowed, most of them stop and take. Because,
when you talk about fashion, when you talk
clothing,
about fashion goods, yeah, for all of you in the audiences, you can comfortably purchase, you know, things from India, because it's as Darshan said, it's quite.
In fact, brands like Tommy Hilfiger, which is not luxury but more mainstream, or Calvin Klein, or a G-Star pair of jeans, they are actually 15 to 20% cheaper in India, MRP to MRP, okay, compared to European price. If you compare to Dubai, many of them, okay, and you convert Dubai now, the currency is 20 rupees to a dirham or whatever, it's expensive currency. Dubai is actually 20% more expensive than India. So the 2-3 misnomers is, oh, the latest collections don't come to India. Yeah. It's a misnomer.
This is very big misunderstanding.
Yeah. See, no store can have 100% of that brand's line of clothing, because typically every brand in a season has what we call SKUs, okay, or different options between 1,200 to 2,000. And the largest flagship store can't have more than 400 options. Okay. So sometimes you say, oh, I went to London, I saw this, but I didn't find that in this store. Do the opposite. What you found in this store, did you find there? Answer is no. Not because either of that is the last season. Okay. Luxury ensures that as soon as the end of season sale gets over, all the old season goods go back, okay, have to be taken off, and the new season's capsules start arriving, and they all arrive at the same time. We call them drops. There are simultaneous drops all over the world. Okay. So, for instance, this in the next 10 days, the new Bottega collection will arrive into our Bottega stores, and there's a beautiful padded, we call it a padded cassette bag with the chain. Last season was a pouch. Every woman wanted the Bottega pouch. This time it's a padded cassette with the chain. We already started pre-bookings for it, and it's in 6 colors, and we're getting all the 6 colors. Okay, and as it moves into the stores of Europe, it moves into India and in China and in Japan. So, no difference.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people are feeling very comfortable that you explained, how things changed since GST. I'm getting a lot of messages from the audience that they are very, very relieved and happy to have learned that. I want to, ask you a little bit about, we spoke about e-commerce, we spoke about a little bit of, virtual reality and all of that. We spoke about brick and mortar. But if you had to pin down, like when you talk about luxury sales or when you talk about buying luxury, right? People only know brick and mortar, like going to the physical store and shopping, like actually connecting with the salesperson there and buying a product and coming out with the experience. And then people only know the .com, so the website, going to the website, putting the item in your cart. And in most cases, I don't want to say because things come late or whatever, but there are a lot of portals that are not shipping to India or that are not selling to India. What, except for .coms and physical stores, what other channels of outreach have you seen, or sales have you seen luxury brands adopting in the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years? And do you think that it's going to continue working for them, or is there anything new that you've seen happening in the sales or the retail space, except for the brick and mortar and the e-commerce space?
So first of all, I won't talk about it in the third person. When you say I have seen, means I've watched someone else do it, because there's no one else. 1 out of 2 luxury brands in this country are with us. 80% affordable luxury brands are with us. They're the only player in the world which sells Giorgio Armani and Zegna and Canali and Hugo Boss and and so on and so forth, etc. 2 channels we have pioneered as new channels. Okay. 7 years ago, we pioneered the concept of what we call home shopping. And the way it started anecdotally is we had a very rich customer from actually Anand. Most of you know Anand is a very rich city in Gujarat. And there's a family of 4 people who came to shop at Palladium, and then, of course, a store manager struck a good rapport. They did a large purchase and they exchanged numbers. And about 2 months later, because the storekeeper, sent on WhatsApp a few images and saying, "Sir, we got a new job," etc. So he said, "I'm not coming to Bombay for a while. Next time I'm there." He says, "No worries, I can come over and you can, send someone to Anand." He says, "Really? You would send someone to Anand?" And that's how the story started. And then he got 3 of his best friends, and they are large homes, etc., etc. We have done on an ongoing basis. We do home shopping across 300 cities of India. In fact, so we carry a database, of 9 million customers. 800,000 of my customers, nearly 9% of that 9 million customers, are actually through home shopping. So we are constantly going to rich people's homes in Nagpur and Anand and in Surat and Nadiad and the Gujarat belt and Jaipur and the Rajasthan belt and all of that. Last 90 days, post the COVID disruption, we have pioneered yet another new channel called distance selling. So selling through Zoom chats and video chats. So it is not e-commerce. So you have a number, you call up the gentleman, they'll put up in a Zoom chat like this. The person at the other end is holding a iPad and actually walking you through the store. And if there is a particular bag, it's saying, "Oh, I love that. Can you show me closer?" And then take it closer. And there are 2 people normally doing that. So someone else then drapes a bag or opens it and shows it. So we call it distance selling. It's not e-commerce. You're not going to a portal. You're not going to a site. You don't have to give your credit card swipe number, all of that, etc., etc. You are shopping through distance. So you have all the drama that I spoke to you about, about the theater around selling. It is assisted. So you can ask lots of questions. You can tell me, how does this yellow look? Because very often online, you don't know, is it a yellow ochre, a dirty yellow, a lemon yellow, the right yellow, because you want the right yellow. And you can say, "Can you show it to me in different lights? Can you walk out? Can you walk out of the store and, do all of that?" We have had an outreach, since you use a phrase, of more than 1 million people, and we have had a 6% conversion. 60,000 customers, we have done a sale in less than 90 days to distance selling.
Wow.
And I hope Mr. Nitish Jain is listening. So I know while he's hunkered down at home, I can always do a Zoom chat and, get him the next cardigan or whatever he loves, So sitting right there. You don't have to take any risks. And there are so many customers who come back and say, even when the world comes back to normal, this is so nice. Men especially, because they are lazy shoppers. They don't want to go store after store, and then all the goods come home, and that also on a trial basis. So I can say, okay, I'd like this, okay, and we'll send it home. Okay, you keep what you want, and we charge you for it, and it's come back. So a good part of the luxury is innovation. And would you ask this question? So from home shopping to distance selling, of course, there's always selling in travel selling, which is airport stores, all of that, the classic brick and mortar stores, the omni-channel digital commerce. So it's a combination.
This is like pampering the customer, like to another
level.
What's it all
about?
Yeah, this is, I mean, literally.
But if you look at what's happened in food, so Mask as one of the high-end restaurants, Mask will at a cost of 10,000 rupees for a couple. Just create the whole drama in your house. You don't need to go to the Mask restaurant. They'll move the restaurant to your home. Well, you can't consume food through a distance selling, but it's equivalent. So all these high-end luxury restaurants converted the kitchens into dark kitchens or takeaway kitchens because the customer couldn't come to them. Okay, and the law doesn't allow restaurants to be open, at least in Bombay City as yet. And earlier in Delhi City, you're going to people's homes and you're creating beautiful sit-downs with the same, with the same theater.
So, Michelin chefs also doing that home service.
Absolutely.
People love it. People love being pampered. So, I mean, I was absolutely unaware of, the fact that Reliance Brands is doing the distance.
I know Surabhi is listening. The next call for you, we'll sell you the next Jimmy Choo shoe or bag.
Absolutely. I mean, that it would just be such a unique experience to have someone do that for you.
You should go through that. You should go through the experience and experience the experience. It's quite something, even if I'm saying so.
Absolutely. I would love to do that. There is another question that I'm going to take just before we move into our last segment, because I think Jasraj has literally requested me 3 times, please ask my question to Mr. Mehta. Why isn't sustainability being adopted by luxury brands the way it should be, and how India can be a forefront runner in this trend? So
it is being adopted. So first let's understand, I think this is another fairly misused word, sustainability. So we must understand, like most people think that organic cotton, wearing a shirt made 100% organic cotton is sustainable. Actually, the answer is no, because when you are growing cotton organically, the water consumption, nearly doubles. You see, one of the most polluting industries in the world is fashion. Fashion, is a $3-point-something trillion industry. And in the earth, air, and water, we consume the maximum amount of water. So one of the biggest actually trends in sustainability, not just from luxury, but every level, is under ownership. The problem is, thanks to fast fashion, you go to H&M, this is walking around, you don't intend to purchase. Okay, you've gone with a friend and you see something nice, nice t-shirt with a graphic. Okay, 1200 rupees, 800 rupees, I just bought it. Before I know, I bought 4 things. 2 of them I never wore. 2 of them I wore once or twice and I threw it away. It's like fast food. Fast food is, half of it is wasted. Correct. Now, luxury on the other hand is basically saying, I'll carefully think, and even if I have to buy 1 bag or 1 shoe or 1 dress, I will be careful. And irrespective of the price, if you make 10 t-shirts versus 1 Gucci t-shirt, the 10 t-shirts will consume 10 times more water than that 1 t-shirt. So what is happening is increasingly consumers are questioning this movement of fast fashion, where less is more. And in fact, more and more brands are now bringing in recycled products. That means I will buy back, the old diesel jeans. I will send it back to the factory, wash it and re-put it in my store as, initially we used to call it pre-used, now we call it pre-loved. So pre-loved pair of jeans, that means you are buying a pair of jeans knowing that someone else has worn it, but of course it's gone to all the clinical laundries and completely cleaned, all of that, etc. And that's a growing trend. In fact, a lot of our stores are going to start actually launching what we call pre-owned or pre-loved, goods. But real ultimate sustainability is when the overall consumption and the waste gets reduced. Okay. Then you can start talking on carbon footprint, and you can start talking a whole host of things, etc. Incidentally, next Bottega bag in the big collection is a bag made of paper. It costs 2.5 lakhs rupees. So it's not made of leather. Paper. I can send you a picture. Survi, I hope, making notes. It's just getting launched in under 10 days. It's the top. If you go on Instagram, okay, it is the top, the it bag of this season. And it's not out of leather. And that's Bottega's answer on sustainability. So they are moving there. But I think the ultimate sustainability is less is more. If you need 5 shirts, buy 3 or buy 4, don't buy 8.
Yeah. And I think luxury is about that, you know, less
Correct.
is more.
Correct.
Don't buy too much, buy one, but that one should be perfect. So,
And it's timeless. See, more and more luxury. That Patola sari, I keep on going back to the example, goes as an heirloom from the grandmother to the mother to the daughter. Okay. And it's timeless. Okay. And that Paithani and that Banarasi and then so on and so forth, all the silks. But that was our version of luxury. No? Okay.
Absolutely.
So it's fairly timeless.
Absolutely. I'm going to move a little bit to our next segment, although the audience is, I mean, there are so many interesting questions. I feel like picking each and every one of them, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to take all your questions, guys, because I think it is going to, the session can go on for the entire day. Darshan can keep talking for the entire day. He'll never get bored. You can see the level of energy he has. But I think a lot of people are, you know, can't wait to see that paper bag.
It's on Instagram.
Yeah, so please check it out on Instagram on Bottega, on the Bottega page. There's an interesting question that I do want to pick up here, which this person has asked me twice actually, about luxury discounting. And you know, there are these villages. We know that even in Paris you have La Marni, Lavati. You have a lot of these hard discount retail outlets. There are outlet shopping. Do you see that ever happening in India? Do you see this kind of solid, heavy discounting taking place in a country like India?
First of all, it's not solid, heavy discounting. So I'll give you an example. And it's an interesting model for every student who is currently or potentially planning a career in fashion, not just luxury, to learn. There's a company called Value Retail, started by an ex-Harvard Business School alum. Okay, brilliant guy. Okay, and in fact, his daughter coincidentally happened to be with my son in the same college. But Value Retail started one of the finest examples of what's called an outlet village. It's called Bicester Village outside London. Many of you would have been to Bicester Village. Now, what happens is that first of all, again going back to the concept of theatre, Bicester Village created the train connectivity, a whole station, and you can spend a whole day at Bicester Village. Okay, the food is awesome. Okay. The environment is created, you know, the right kind of brand mix is created. There's lots of parking. So Bicester Village got created by the Value Retail owner going to the Bicester Village county. You know, they have like the equivalent of the panchayat that we have there, etc. The village council, and saying, this is what we'd like to do. Give us your land virtually for free. So they got a 99-year lease free, but saying we'll bring so much tourism. Because when the tourists come, okay, they will pay for parking and they'll pay for food and there'll be hotels now. So in Bicester Village, in fact, let me tell you, I was talking to the CEO of Selfridges and they're saying, we don't watch Harrods, we watch Bicester Village's competition, because the only competition Selfridges happens, 40% of the tourists or visitors in Selfridges or Bicester Village are Chinese. Okay, and that's the competition, correct? So it has lifted the whole economy of Bicester Village and put Bicester Village in the global map. Okay. Now they do it as a science. So Gucci finally opened, although they don't have Vuitton stores. There's a Dior, there's a Gucci. We never thought there'll be a Gucci outlet store, but there's a beautiful Gucci outlet and Prada and the usual suspects from luxury down to the next level. So beautiful tenant mixing that they have done, all of that. All the discounts are beautifully controlled. They range from anywhere from 30 to 45%. In some cases of weak brands, they may go below 50%, all of that, etc. But then you got hands-free shopping and you got touchless and you got all kinds of things. So it is, when you go to Bicester Village, you don't get a sense that you're buying cheap, but you're not buying in a cheap way. The theater and the drama is as powerful. So those people have now opened, okay, so they have 4 villages in Europe, as they're called. Metzingen in Germany is another place. Now they open in Shanghai, Value Retail. And I asked Mike, is a gentleman's name, and said, would you open in India? And says, get me a place where we can get between 20 to 30 acres of land, because it needs that size of a land. Okay. In a nodal accessible point, quote unquote, which is virtually free. That means either the city council or whatever else gives it for a very low price, because you can't buy the land, pay that cost, okay, and give that value to the customer, because otherwise the cost becomes too high. That's the challenge in India, that in India, land is expensive, it's largely privately owned, and if a government were to give this, then of course in a democratic environment, lots of questions will be raised and saying, why is the government favoring this or all of that? So there are economic and political reasons. Otherwise, they do a service. Now, why would Gucci sell there? Unlike the US outlet, US manufactures for outlet. So they are making a sham. So the Calvin Klein that you buy in outlet and the Calvin Klein that you buy in the mainline store are different products. It's a cheaper fabric. Okay. European, especially Bicester Village and all the other villages, and Italy has a lot of these. There's one beautiful one outside Florence. They are actually a leftover of the earlier season. So part of fashion will always be, there'll be cut sizes and some colors that did not work, and they need to move out of the shelves. So they are not manufactured for outlet or off price. They are actually leftovers, okay? But there will always be leftover, and there'll be people. But that joy of finding a nice Gucci bag at a 30% off has its own joy, okay? And especially Asian consumers, as I said, the Chinese love it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So someday in India, but if we solve this social, so to say, bit of a political economic problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a huge success in India if it comes. We are moving into the last segment now, Darshan, where I actually want to, kind of address some points or questions which are going to help our young talents, most of who are, listening to you from the audience. And I'm sure these questions I'm asking you on their behalf. So a lot of, young talents these days, there is this uncertainty building a career in luxury. What's going to happen to the luxury market in India? How do I shape up my career? What do I need to do? So few points from you would really help. Few, like tips from you would really help. So when you talk about building a career in luxury, to work, for the young talents these days, what academic background or discipline would help? What should be their approach?
First, the future of luxury.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, one of the interesting things about consumerism, as you move up the value chain, okay, there's no reverse gear in consumerism. So once you move from economy class to traveling business class, it's going to be very difficult to go back to economy, because you start feeling that the guy next to you is touching you and the elbow room is not enough.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
But you forget that you are used to train travel, and then you move to air travel. Okay, so the good thing is, all good things in life corrupt. Okay, when you start wearing a better linen, you're not going to go back to a cheaper shirt, and likewise with a better bag, and likewise with the better food, and so on and so forth. So as I said, it's a tide that is coming. The tide doesn't have a reverse gear. Okay, the inflow of the tide, the volume may become less or more. It's a constantly rising tide, and I have seen it across 2-3 meltdowns or crises, or what you would like to call it, stock market crisis, the Lehman 2008 crisis, all of that, etc. It's constant, steady growth. And while I have had a bit of an accident, okay, into this career, I've loved my last 20 years, and I love the job that I do. I jump out of bed every day. So I would recommend this as a very interesting career, and I'll give you 2 reasons why. And that's also linked to the academic reasons. What does it take to succeed? Okay, and there are 2-3 powerful points that I'd like to make here. First, one of the biggest myths in this business is self-referencing. That means if my personal life, if I love luxury, or if I'm into luxury, or I'm born into the famous lap of luxury, then I will be a more successful management person, or a leader, or a player in luxury. Okay, as Nitish mentioned, I'm an accountant by background. I didn't go to marketing school. I didn't go to a design school. I didn't even do an MBA. Boring cost and works and chartered accountant, all that, jazz. And I come from a strong middle class background. That's what so my mother didn't carry around a Bottega bag. Okay, leave alone that. Okay, I don't even know she ever carried a branded bag in her life. So I didn't grow up in the lap of luxury. And that actually gave me what I call fresh eyes. That gave me an objective. Because too many people who think that, oh, if I'm personally steeped into luxury, you're actually biased. Okay. So I view this business, you know, I was a CEO of an earlier luxury company, as Nitish mentioned, and I started this company ground up to where we are. Still fairly agnostic, because in my personal life, okay,
Yeah.
I am not a luxury consumer. Okay, in a personal life, I'm a vegetarian, teetotaler. You know, I wear a few good denims and so on and so forth, etc. I'm not the kind of person who can dish out a credit card and buy 5 shirts of 20,000 rupees each or 30,000 rupees each, etc., etc. Correct? No, I just don't have it in me culturally. I can afford it, but I don't do it. But that's an advantage. So don't make the mistake of self-referencing to think that you have to be a particular type. The type that you have to be, if you can assimilate what I call a left brain and a right brain faculty.
Yeah.
So, okay, as an accountant, I'm more analytical possibly. So I'm more left brain. Some of you may come from a slightly more creative pursuit and you're a bit more right brain. Okay. If a right brain person can put on a more business mindset, example I gave and saying, how many of you will learn to calculate what the basic custom duty is and what is the math relating to VAT? That's one end of it, correct? Now that's the accountant in me talking. But at the same point of time, if the accountant can start learn, okay, how does a garment dyeing product create a better hand? And I am not a textile engineer, I didn't study engineering, but it's not even rocket science, not rocket science. So when I accidentally went into this career, okay, I said, okay, my company manufactures denim, let me understand, okay, how a salvage denim is made and how the front and the back and how the belt attachment happens differently and why does a denim lose shape after wearing a few times and few washes, and why you develop what are known as knees, you know, when you wear a denim, and how to make sure that a good denim doesn't develop knees. Okay, I went to it. So if you can combine a bit of your right brain and left brain put together, and if you can go 1 mile deep rather than 1 mile wide. Okay, too many people tend to go 1 mile wide but 1 inch deep. Go the other way. Okay, in whatever aspect that you do, if you go deeper, okay. And in my office, a phrase we use very often is, knowing a little about a lot is a dangerous place. You rather know a lot about little. I didn't need to know a lot about a lot, but that you get eventually. But to start with not knowing a lot, you know, a little about a lot. And that's what too many people end up doing, because then their shallow knowledge starts happening. And then you won't become a disruptor. Finally, any creative thing, and fashion is creative in its own way, food is creative, art is creative, you have to be a disruptor. You have to be a contrarian in thinking. So if you're a contrarian thinker, if you can assimilate left brain and right brain, and if you're not doing self-referencing, so forget in your personal life. This is not about your personal life. Our chairman, you know, our founder chairman, Dhirubhai Ambani, and our current chairman, a lot of money in Reliance was made out of oil. We are a hydrocarbons company, but I don't think he was in love with oil. Okay, it's a way of it. So what happens in their personal life is different in your professional life. So, you know, separate the two. But if you can bring that all, every candidate, I'm sure every person on this call, okay, can make a, you know, stellar career. And the beauty of this business, and I've worked in a few other businesses, is this is a business of many moving parts. And we love businesses. I used to think in my early formative years that the most complex thing to run is a restaurant. Okay, so Nitish may know there was a famous South Indian rites where a college was called Satkar. And I still remember my days at Satkar, and it had a menu of 4 pages. And I said, how is it that they never run out of something? So then we used to try trick, you know, go at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night and say, let's order the, you know, third last item on the 3rd page. They had it. And I said, that's complicated. So I thought restaurant business was a business of many moving parts. This even beats that. Okay, because there the menu doesn't change every 4 weeks. Here the SKUs change. Fashion is in and out, and you know, it's transient, and there are colors and there are silhouettes. And there are a white shirt in one of my stores. We have 340 types of white shirts, because each white shirt comes in 2 sleeve lengths, 7 different collar types, okay, 5 different fabrics, okay, and then the sizes. So you can do the math yourself. Okay, so I love the complexity in the moving parts of the business. So it really challenges you. So it's, in that sense, it's a great profession or a great career to build in. But sorry, it's a long answer to a
It's
question.
a very interesting answer, even though it's long. But I do want to ask you something that, a lot of times I get this from my students, that um, should I know you said that they don't necessarily need to love luxury to work in luxury, but of course, I mean, this is something that they always say, like, should I be passionate about fashion? Like, fashion is my passion. Is this a requirement for career success in luxury? Like, if they are working in the luxury fashion sector, so should they love fashion, or should they understand fashion, or what knowledge of fashion is enough for them to kickstart their career, if I can put it that way?
So I know my colleague Surbi could just be falling off the chair now, laughing, because this statement, very often, so many interviews, and I must have interviewed thousands of people or met thousands of people, and say, this is the place I want to be because fashion is my passion. It's very important to enjoy what you're doing rather than do what you enjoy. Too many people, young people, end up spending some of the most fertile years of their life, okay, trying to, find out what they enjoy. So long as something is not, first of all, illegal or immoral. So this job, so long as it, as a CEO or at any level, doesn't ask me to do any underhand dealing or wrong things or, all of that. So if it's not illegal, I would personally not work in, let's say, a tobacco company, because I have certain strong reservations, what I call immoral. So if it's not that, this is as good a career as any. It is not important, that you see, you have to quickly outgrow the glamour part of that business. I'm not suggesting there's no fun in this business, but there's fun in many. I'm sure there's fun in education business, in academics, and you deal with young people and fresh people, and I'm sure, all of you and Nitish, and you had great fun, building SPGen Global to where it is and where it will go on, so on and so forth, etc. So the point I'm trying to make is that so long as you understand that this business is a challenging business like any other business, a bit more so because there are many moving parts, you need to bring in the same ingredients to make a successful recipe. You need to have lots of patience. You need to acquire depth. Too many people overplan their career. And they think the first job is right, or second job, or third job. What is important is you give every job, the degree of patience and affection and gratitude and respect that job deserves. If you do that, you will get there. I know through our conversation earlier, you spent in the academic background 8-9 years, and what a period of time. And now you've built a foundation, and over a period of time, you will get there, and you will become an overachiever, and you'll become a disruptor in this business. But if you're coming here only because you think there are fashion shows that happen, which do happen, no denying that, but they are few and far between. I am not allowed to attend. I don't attend because I'm not a buyer. Only buyers go for fashion shows, or you get to, to hobnob with models and photographies and shoots and all of that. Again, Survi goes there. She's my head of marketing. I am not allowed to go there. I just saw the new Satyapal shoot as I came. It was sent to me on my WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. So if you're doing it for the right reasons, it's a fantastic career. But that fashion is my passion, and hence it's like in my advertising days, there are lots of mothers used to come and say, my daughter writes great poetry, or she's very good at art. But Mr. Piyush Pandey or Prasoon Pandey became legends in advertising, not because, in fact, Piyush Pandey went to a Hindi medium school, and he was actually an unsuccessful builder from Jaipur. And he's now become what he is. And his brother Prasoon Pandey, has become what he is, and Balki, who now writes such beautiful scripts and whatever for even Bollywood. These are all people, if you look at their background in advertising, they didn't go there because they wrote very good poetry or were knights in arts. Every mother generally believes that my daughter or son very good in art and all of that. So I have nothing against people who are good in art and writing poetry. Don't get me wrong. But if you believe that that is the essential X factor or ingredient, then you could be, starting off the wrong note.
Yeah, I think that was a fabulous answer, and you've also helped me, to be able to answer young talents when they come to me and tell me, I'm good at blogging, or I love fashion, or I'm a fashionista, I'm a trendsetter, which is why I think I should work in fashion. So, I mean, absolutely, it's not just about that one thing. You have to be you have to take in everything, the non-glamour side and the glamour side.
In the world of Instagram and Tinder, everyone is a fashionista.
Absolutely. Before we take maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience, I want to actually, end our segment by asking you one question, which I've been meaning to ask since the time I met you. In your case, luxury fashion, you can say, you kind of did mention it has been kind of like an accidental career. Can you tell us more about this? In short, if I can ask you immodestly, can you talk about the recipe of your success? What is the recipe of Darshan Mehta's success?
Yes, it is serendipity. My earlier boss, who I worked for 23 years, just one fine day called me and in a roundabout way suggested that in a week's time I should take over and I was a stockbroker. So I was running a stockbroking company.
Wow.
As a CEO of a stockbroking company, he says, we have this company in Bangalore and I'd like you to go and run it. So I said, please run it. Okay. I thought I was pro-temping for a CEO or someone who's coming. And he says, no, I want you to go and run it. And before I knew, 10 days later, I was there in Bangalore with some, 2,000 people,
wow.
Company, 3 factories. And I remember on the 7th day calling up the factory manager of one of the factories and saying that, look, the factories only work one shift because they're women labor. So I said, I'd like to come at 7 p.m. in the evening because it's in Hosur outside Bangalore. If you can teach me how a pair of jeans are made. Because I didn't know how a pair of jeans are made. And he thought, he had heard of this new CEO had come up and he thought, sir, humne kuch galat, meaning you take my trip here. He sensed a bit of humor or a joke. I said, it took him a few minutes to realize that I'm serious. And he gave me, I started doing typically what I call reverse mentoring. Okay. So I started taking tutorials in terms of how to make a pair of jeans. In fact, after this, even in my current, company, even where we have reached, every day I feel that I'm less and less in touch with the new upcoming customer. Okay, so this whole word of retooling and relearning. So after this, with an hour's break from 2:30 to 4, I have a tutoring lesson from a reverse mentor from my own company.
Wow.
Okay, who is teaching me because I'm not a digitally native person. And my new customers, okay, the Gen Z as you call, they're all digital natives. Okay, so for them, anything you want to get bread in the house, the first thing they'll go online and saying, where's the best bread? And I don't think like that, So to that extent, from a marketing point of view, a customer insights point of view, my reverse mentoring, okay, so I have 4 sessions, and in fact, this is the 3rd session, and he's given me some homework also, which it does that. But so it's a business, and that's why I mentioned that, meeting people who have fresh eyes and fresh minds and who have fresh approach always helps, because this is also business where you tend to get jaded. So after my first, 2 months, in that earlier company where I was a newcomer from a stockbroking into a fashion business, I was said, sir, I want to show you the next season's line. So the head of the studio was very, very proudly, I said, sure, I'd love to, although I knew little, so I said, I'll give my 2 bit into it. And then he was presenting crew necks. So that time we had a brand called Lee and Wrangler. So crew necks are round neck t-shirts. So I said, what about V-neck t-shirts? He said, no, men in India don't wear V-neck. I said, is there a research onto that? And this I'm talking on 15 years ago. So, no, sir, we have tried. Men don't wear V-neck. Okay, women wear V-neck. So I said, okay. I did some bit of my own dipstick and I came back and saying, don't worry, the risk is on me. Let's have a line of V-neck. Sir, you don't understand. In his mind, of course, I'm sure he went and told his wife or girlfriend and saying, here's this accountant who's a new CEO. The guy doesn't know, anything. He now wants to make V-neck. It was one of our fastest selling lines. Okay. Because no one in the market was making V-necks. Okay.
Yeah.
And after that, I never had, because everyone was making, so we had shirts business. So Arrow used to compete with Van Heusen and Louis Philippe, and everyone said it is now Madras checks. So I said, we'll make candy stripes. Okay. Although I'm not a creative person. So it is also a business of disruption and not serving same. If you want to be a leader in this business, okay,
Element of surprise, yeah.
you have to be brave. In fact, the holding company of Diesel, one of our partners, it's called Only the Brave. And that sums it up. So it's a business only the brave. Okay, so you have to be brave. Okay, you have to listen to your customers, but you have also got to do, okay, contrarian things. Having said that, I don't handle marketing, I don't handle creative design, all of that. We are specialists. Just to quickly answer your last part about, some degree of recipe of success. First and foremost, as I said, important to enjoy what you do rather than, look for doing what you enjoy. So I enjoyed stockbroking. Even in that time, people used to stop me and ask for, recommendations and stuff like that. And I enjoy what I do now. Patience, okay. Too many people think that their career is for the next 2 years or 3 years. After that, they are all going to hang in their boots. Ain't going to happen, okay. I still believe, as so does our chairman, that his and mine finest 10 years lie ahead of us and not behind us, okay. So that belief must be there, with lots of patience. Third, if you get into a leadership position, okay, the first thing I tell people, don't hire for sameness. Most people hire people, okay, for look mini themselves. In fact, a few years ago, a very senior colleague of mine, okay, I was very close to him, decided to leave us. And I called him home and I was chatting with him, and he finally said, boss, we have great personal rapport, but you and I are very different people. I said, thank you for saying that. You have hit the nail on the head. That's the reason I want you to be here and you'll be successful. And he changed his mind. I said, because you are different people, don't hire for sameness, which also means that you need to tolerate, people, noise around. And then early on, I had the good fortune of working straight with the CEO who was the head of that group. So I work at Arvind, so Mr. Lalbhai was my boss. And I had the good fortune as a young rookie straight to work with him. Okay. And this I tell a lot of young people in this group, that if you have the good fortune of working straight with a very senior person, okay, respect that person, but don't be in awe of that person. The faster you overcome the awe, okay, the faster you'll start getting productive. Too many people have the good fortune once in a while of coming in close contact or working directly with very senior people, okay. And as I said, there's a difference being respectful and being in awe. Okay, don't be in awe. You have a mind of your own. I always had a mind of my own, and I never, because I was not in awe, I was not disrespectful, but because I was not in awe, I could put forth my points. Even in advertising, I was an accidental, went from being the CFO of the ad agency to.
Guys, since we are waiting for Darshan to log back in, I'd request if you have any, last few questions for him, you can start typing them. Darshan, sorry, we lost you for a few minutes, but I request.
Sorry about that. I think.
No, that's
fine. Yeah, please go.
So you were telling us about following, not to be in awe of your boss, to follow your, I think, instinct, to be.
Yeah, so I, in a sense, more or less summarized. Okay, and as I said, depending on if you're in leadership position, after some of the things, that's what you follow. But for young people, and I'm sure many of them will have occasions to work directly with senior people and all of that. As I said, learn the difference between respect and awe, because if you remain in awe, it will cloud your own mind. Okay. And to that extent, we are all gifted with our own X factor and our own points of view. And in fact, more often than not, companies like ours and leaders like me hire young people to understand their minds, okay, and understand newer thoughts and fresh thoughts, okay. So if you can keep that, okay, you'll be successful.
Absolutely. Do you have any parting thoughts, any tips that you want to give to young students who want to pursue a career in luxury, or who want to kind of make grow successfully in this sector? Do you have any tips for them, any quick thoughts that you want to share?
So this is, as I said, first of all, it's a very large business. Luxury itself is $300 billion globally. More than $150 billion coming out of Asia and India. Businesses growing, all of that, etc. Doesn't have a reverse gear. In that sense, timeless. it challenges you, both right brain and left brain. As I earlier used the phrase, there are many moving parts, which is a challenge for any, any upcoming leader. And you could come from if an accountant like me can make a reasonable success out of it, okay, in many ways. So there is no defined, you could be an engineer, okay, and you could still make a great success. So long as, in a sense, you have a curious mind, okay, and you have the, as I said, the humility to surround yourself, not with the like-minded people in your cohort, so long as you don't do self-referencing into the small well in which we live in, okay, and are able to assimilate and throughput very well. And finally, nothing happens without patience, okay. So it's about patiently
Be
building.
patient, be curious, be eager to learn, explore, experiment. That's I think something very important. And I'm just going to take two questions, Darshan. I know we are kind of crossed our time, but very two quick questions from the audience, since I promised them, and then we can conclude right after that. So, hi, would like your insight on with such a major drop in GDP and increase in unemployment, what will be the future of luxury in 2021? Everybody, I think, wants to hear this from you, Darshan. What do you foresee?
Yeah, again, good question. So I think there are two sectors of consumption, okay? So we tend to break up consumption into what we call discretionary and non-discretionary. Non-discretionary is food, grocery, vegetables, dairy, sometimes education, all of that. So the non-discretionary spends, okay, is going to be insulated, okay, because people still buy that, all of that. And the other extreme, in the discretionary spend, okay, the high end of consumption, especially luxury, fashion, clothing, all of that, we are already seeing now over the last 2 months, a good line of sight that is the least dented. It is a mid sector, okay, that is really, really heavily dented. That means the top end of Indian society, at luxury, we are talking to only 10 million people in India out of 1.3 billion people. But those 10 million people, 1 crore, those 10 million people have 50% of the investable surplus of the whole country. So out of those 1 crore people, okay, there are, as I said, okay, 80 lakh people, 8 million, 0.8 million, 8 lakh people who are dollar billionaires and continue to be so, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at them, their foreign travel has stopped. A lot of the very high expenditure around the occasion, which is bridal wear and all of that market. Okay, that means a spend of money on 2,000, 3,000 people, lavish dinners, all the florists, all the decor, all of that is, all the spending on experiences. So I went to Maldives for scuba diving. I did to all of that. Because you are all hunkered down in a very narrow geography. As a result, a lot of that money is coming into actually luxury goods and products. The last brand that I launched 4 weeks before the COVID closure was a Tiffany store. So India's first Tiffany store is the joint venture we have. We launched at the Chanakya Mall in Delhi. I'm surprised when the store was closed, Chanakya Mall was closed doing business. Through distance shopping, we were doing 1 to 1.5 crores every month of sales. Because people are saying, oh, it's my daughter's 18th birthday. And I promised to take her to Alaska. I can't take her. I'm going to buy her a 10 lakh rupee bracelet.
Wow.
Okay. So there are other categories which are coming into that. So during the period of COVID disruption, of course, COVID is not going to be here for all the while. Okay, it will go. And I'm very, very optimistic and positive and saying this 2 gram in total of the virus is not going to kill the world. Okay, and anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I go by that adage. So we're all going to come out very strong out of this.
Absolutely.
So don't time this. Okay, careers are for long periods of time, and this is not the last disruption. Hopefully, it's the last big disruption you'll see in your lifetime, but maybe not. Okay, so it's going to be for a long period of time. So this is like in the stock market. Don't time. If you like a stock, buy it for the long term. Okay, because you like the quality of the sector or the management. So likewise, luxury is a category. And when I say luxury, it includes affordable luxury, like a Michael Kors or a Coach or a Tory Burch or a Kate Spade or a Hugo Boss, which is not luxury, but it's a stepping stone into a Xenia or a Giorgio Armani. Correct? So that top end of the market, okay, I believe is of the remaining lot fairly insulated, and just the month of July and August, okay, what we have done. It's also business where you create desire. So we just created a new concept called the Luxury Shopping Festival, and we had something like 25 conversations. So we built conversations because we are selling objects of delight.
Yeah.
That when you, I'm sure, will go and check out that paper bag from Bottega, and the good chance you'll have the desire to buy it.
Yeah.
Okay, COVID or no COVID, no. So we are selling objects of desire. So I can sit here, give many reasons, but short answer is, okay, we are not phased. In fact, we are, as we talk this year, we're opening 45 new stores. Okay.
And with that thought, with that note, I want to quickly ask my last question, which I know the audience is literally, like pushing me to ask, and every young student today wants to ask this question. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I'm answering this question on a daily basis, but of course it holds a lot of weightage when it comes from someone like you. What are your thoughts on opportunities in the luxury sector in the coming future? Because you also mentioned that we're expanding, we are opening more stores, we are doing this. So do you see young professionals getting jobs easily in the luxury sector? Of course, given the fact that they are trained well, they are they've taken care of their base foundation level knowledge, schooling, everything. What jobs do you foresee? Do you see jobs being there, like for available for students to apply in the luxury domain in India particularly? What are your thoughts on jobs?
So if you break up luxury in all the consumer facing businesses, the hospitality industry has taken a big knock. So a lot of people used to go into hospitality. I'm again talking the short term. Okay?
Yeah.
And they have taken the biggest knock because hotels have a very large, like Oberoi, my parent company is a big shareholder of the Oberoi. We treat it as part of the group. And I know that Oberoi just in Gurgaon, for instance, have a staff of 760 people, and the hotel's been closed. Now recently it's been open. So hotel as an industry, then airline as an industry, taken a big knock. F&B as an industry, and a lot of people used to go into luxury F&B, taken a big.
Yeah.
So luxury fashion, okay, we are the only player, and we are growing. Okay, in fact, we've also, not at a luxury level, but at a mid level in our retail, we've just done a big acquisition, which was announced, last Saturday actually, of another large player in India. But Reliance as a group and Reliance Brands, my company, as I said, we are continuing to growing. Next week, I'm launching Tiffany.in. We are launching a very high-end home brand called West Elm and Pottery Barn. And we are also launching online and offline stores. And other than us, honestly, there is no luxury player in this country or affordable luxury, because we virtually control the market. So other than us, I don't think there are too many jobs. Okay. Mm-hmm. But again, don't lose heart. Okay. This is a time to upskill yourself. I would again say, fingers crossed, 6 months, 8 months, it's not going to kill you. This is a long-term decision. Okay. So hang in there. Okay. Constantly reach out, be bold, express your thoughts.
I think train yourself, explore, during this time.
Whole host of things.
Train yourself during this time, explore, expand your knowledge during this time. Use this time as a time to grow, grow yourself. So I think with that, Darshan, we've concluded our discussion, our chat, and I can't begin to thank you enough. I mean, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for talking so openly, so frankly, for answering all our questions, mine too, the audiences. I mean, you're an encyclopedia of luxury, if I can say so. There is just a small last segment that we normally always do with our guests, for which I'll even request Mr. Jain, if you could just turn on your camera. We'll do either a stay positive sign or a thumbs up sign as a concluding note, so that we can capture this moment, and then we know that we'll remember this forever, that you were here and then you shared so much of knowledge and insights with us. So if I may, you can either do a stay positive sign, or you can just do a thumbs up, whatever you like.
All the best. Thank you so much. Okay.
So I hope that, Priyanka, we are getting this moment captured. Thank you so much,
And
sir.
thank you, Nitish. Always pleasure. And thank you, Smita. And thank you, the audience. Okay. So I wish
Thank you,
someday it's a
audience.
two-way conversation. Thank you.
We're getting a lot of thank yous from the audience as well. So thank you so much. And hope to
Pleasure.
have you again soon in the future.
Pleasure's all mine. Cheers.
Oh,
Bye,
you're on
Smita.
mute, sir. Sir, you're on mute, Mr. Jain. You are saying something, but you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just telling Darshan that I'm going to run and buy the Bottega paper bag as soon as it's launched. So, and it's for myself, not for my wife.
We are doing the private booking already.
That's it. Super. It was so nice to have you on this show.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
And Smita, you were wonderful too.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
very
Sir.
much.
Thank you. See you. Thank you, everyone.